Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Conservative MP Eve Adams is a first-generation Canadian who grew up in a hard-working Ontario family. She became a parliamentary page at the age of 18, and she sat for 7 years on Mississauga City Council before deciding to run federally. Eve Adams joins me now to talk about a very busy life beyond politics. Eve Adams, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's great to have you here.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, you have such an interesting story because, in fact, you're a first-generation Canadian. Your parents came to Canada. In fact, they fled Hungary, communist Hungary, to come to Canada. Do you know why they chose Canada?
Oh, well, they both came separately.
So
my dad...
So they didn't even know each other when they came? Wow.
No, they met in North America.
Yeah.
So my dad came actually during the revolution. So Soviet tanks were coming through Budapest, and he fled during that time. And he was one of 10 children. And he eventually made his way to Canada. He went through Paris and the United States and eventually settled in Canada, worked on a farm in Welland, and just took about every tough job you can imagine, and ended up working in the mines in Sudbury and found some prosperity there and saved up some money and wanted to become an entrepreneur. And then my mother came in the early 70s, and she was visiting some relatives down in the United States, and it was incredibly difficult to even come on a visit. The communist regime was in full swing in Eastern Europe. So you can imagine there's no consumer goods on shelves, and you need to wait in bread lines in order to get products. And you can't speak freely. I mean, you can see with your own eyes clearly that the regime is deficient in many respects. The economy is struggling. You can see just how hungry your neighbors are, how difficult it is for you to survive, and you couldn't speak openly about that for fear of retribution. And I think we forget just how recently that was taking place in Europe, and how many people were suffering under that. And the fact that, a country has to keep its residents within its borders, and I think that speaks volumes. If you can't move freely, there's something seriously wrong there. And so they came. So my mother came to the U.S., and she met with my dad. And
how did they meet?
Through social circles. Okay. Through social circles.
Yeah.
And they decided to get married, and we always joke because she went to visit relatives in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Right.
She'd never been to Sudbury.
Oh my gosh. She was going to Daytona Beach, and then she
married a man from Sudbury. Yes,
oh
yes.
My gosh.
But where the winters are a little bit tougher
than
they might be in Daytona.
They're slightly cooler.
Yeah, yeah.
A little darker.
But wonderful people, really down-to-earth people, great community,
right.
And so they worked awfully hard. They started up renting gas stations, and then they eventually saved up enough money and bought gas stations. And she would run the variety store. She'd have the playpen in the variety store.
Wow.
Going in and out, pumping gas.
That's amazing.
She really is. Long, long hours.
Tell me about how the experience of living within that communist regime affected her once she was here. I mean, did she talk about either positively or negatively, really recognizing the value of what she had here in Canada, or it kind of constraining her in some ways? Did she ever talk about that, or did you ever notice that about her?
Every day.
Really?
Every day at the kitchen table, just how awful things were. She was incredibly homesick. She'd left her family, all of her friends, her community. And she didn't speak the language. To this day, she speaks broken English. Yeah. Really, really great broken English. Yeah. But she didn't take classes, nor did my dad. And so they always struggled filling out any paperwork, and they always felt it was a very big challenge for them to compete here in Canada and to build a better life. So they would yearn for the days, where they were, it was easier for them. My mother had an office job back in Hungary. She was a statistician. And her family was there, and she wanted to be with them. But every day she would talk about, like there just isn't food. No matter how hard you work, no matter how long you're willing to work, there just isn't food. We're hungry.
So did that, were they ever unhappy that they had made the decision to come to Canada, or despite it all, they knew that this was the right place for them to be?
All along, and they are entrenched deeply, and my brothers and I, this this deep respect for how fortunate we were to be here, and how much better our lives were. And they knew that they were struggling very much. I think now, to be fair, now that Europe is prospering so much relative to what she had left, like she left abject poverty, sort of post-war circumstances, communist regimes, like they had absolutely nothing. To go back now, and she's there with her friends and her former schoolmates, there's a sense of nostalgia. So I don't know if that's necessarily a fair comparison. Though.
Sure, that's interesting. Would they consider going back, do you think?
Well, she goes back in the summer for about a month.
That's nice.
Because her friends and her cousins are all aging. You can imagine, right? Like there's villages and villages of folks there, and everybody seems to be related to everyone.
I'm sure.
And I think that was the toughest thing for her, right?
Yeah.
So as a child, you would come home and she'd be playing Hungarian records and crying and just missing her siblings. As you would miss your siblings.
Absolutely.
Right? So it was this big struggle, but they would constantly compliment just how incredible this was, that you could speak about the fact that you didn't like your political leaders here, and how everyone could speak about that freely at Tim Hortons. And that just didn't exist back in Hungary.
Now that you're one of them, she might not like that so much. She might not like that.
Oh, she's pretty fair in her critiques, actually. Really good sense, Make sure that I'm always self-deprecating.
That's right, good and humble.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, no, she's fair in her criticisms. And you know what? When she points out something, she's usually right, as most moms are.
Moms, I know, it's the mom thing.
It is.
You entered, as far as I knew, kindergarten.
Yes.
But still were not speaking English. You took an ESL program, is that right, in kindergarten?
Yes.
That's so interesting. But that must happen to thousands of families, frankly, in Canada.
In Mississauga, Brampton South, which is the area that I represent, we have a very large South Asian population, and it's actually quite the norm. We have about 90% incoming ESL classes in kindergarten.
Wow.
And, part of it is, and I so understand this, my family was very insular. They're busy working. What free time they do have, they want to be with some friends. And, they haven't yet picked up the language. And so when they have children, they're still, one, I think, wanting to pass on the culture and the heritage. And then secondly, there just isn't that much time in a day.
And you're tired anyways. And it requires an extra effort to teach that.
And she didn't speak English.
Yeah.
So, you speak to your child and what is easiest for you.
Do you have memories of it, though, going into kindergarten? And
I remember it well. I remember not understanding. And I also remember, though, as the year would progress, teachers still saying to other children around me, oh, explain it to her, she can't understand you. And it was a very eye-opening experience that I've always carried with me. Just because people can't express themselves doesn't mean they don't understand quite a bit more than you think.
Right. Has it impacted how you treat other people?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
And you were described as a really good student, though, like someone who was meticulous, and you took those lovely neat notes that always completely failed me. But did you really apply yourself as a student, or was it just something that you enjoyed?
You do have a sense that that you want to prove yourself and make sure that your parents' investment was well served and well placed. I think there is amongst all sorts of first-generation Canadians this immense amount of guilt that you want to do well so that your parents, who you see struggling, right, can feel proud and feel reassured in their choices. It's tough, I would see my parents until 2 a.m. out there. And pumping gas was very different than it is today. Today it's self-serve, but way back then it was out in the snow and the cold, and in Sudbury it's awfully cold, and they still kept the gas station there even after we'd moved down south. So there were very long, hard hours. And then when they had the restaurant, when your staff don't show up,
you're it.
You are it. You're the one cooking in the kitchen. You're the one cleaning in the bathroom. You're still the one, though, that has to do your inventory orders. You still have to write your payroll. And they couldn't read and write properly. And so they would often turn to us and ask us for assistance. And so there we would be 12 years old, writing up menus from scratch, right? And assisting them with their ROEs, right? And you name it, whether it was their balance of loss statements, we would assist them because it was just difficult, and they'd have to go to a lawyer each time to have something translated.
Did you resent it as kids, or was it just part of life?
It was the norm. So of course every child wants to go and play with their friends, right? Or watch TV. But your parents would just say, we need help. And that was the key. Help me, please.
Right.
So But it was also nice, and looking back, it was wonderful to spend all that time with them. My dad has since passed away, and he had a really sort of terrible illness where his legs were amputated 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
So, you know, you're very grateful for the time that you do have together.
Yeah.
And if we weren't there when they were working, we would not have seen them.
Did you pump gas too?
Of course.
You did, eh?
Of course.
Wow.
Of course.
That's a really good way to, that's a good beginning in life, and I think because you recognize the value of your hard work. I mean, if you just see other people doing it, you don't have anywhere near the same appreciation of having had to do it yourself.
And wash the windshield and check your oil.
You can do all of that?
I can open just about any kind of car hood.
That's awesome. These are skills that will serve you well for the rest of your life. And it's good cocktail information, too. Yeah. Did you know from an early age what you wanted to do in life? Did you have a clear
You mean
sense?
to go into politics eventually?
Yeah, or anything. I mean, did you think, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, or I'm going to be an astronaut, or had you got a clear sense of politics?
Probably public policy development, and then I sort of went on the accounting fringe. But public policy development,
Yeah.
I was very drawn to that. Yeah.
You were a page.
I was fortunate enough to have won that scholarship in first-year university, and it was an extraordinary time. Actually, your father was there, and he was very well respected.
Thank you.
He would often take his staff out to the cafeteria, and the other staffers would look longingly and say, I just have
They got
nice.
an extra order of French fries or something.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yes, and so that was the time of the Charlottetown debates.
Yeah.
And we were debating the universality of child benefits and how the crow flies for payments on rail lines.
Mm-hmm.
It was very interesting. I found it all very fascinating as a page and loved the late-hour sittings.
Why?
We were talking about, at the time the constitutional debates were sort of the be-all, end-all for everyone. And it was, as an 18-year-old, we thought we were about to define what our nation would be for the next century. Of course, that didn't come to pass, but as an 18-year-old, you felt very honored to even stand on the floor of the House of Commons as others were debating that. It was truly an extraordinary experience.
What did you feel like the first time you went into the House as a page? Was it a nerve-wracking experience, or did you feel that...
Odd.
Odd?
It is a beautiful room.
Yeah.
And to see the history there. Every single carving, every single painting has some depth, some meaning to it, has a backstory. And you're just so respectful for all of the work that went into this.
Yeah. Did it influence the decision to go into politics? Because you did become a municipal councillor in Mississauga for several years, but you would have had other options. So was the parliamentary page position one which was a defining moment in terms of your political activism, or was it just kind of a step along the way?
It was an extraordinary experience that paid for university.
Right. And there was the good point of it all. Good.
So there was, there was some reality to all of that. Yeah. No, running municipally for the first time, that was actually a very unique experience. I was one of 21 candidates. And
That's a lot of candidates.
The incumbent in Mississauga, incumbents generally win re-election, and the incumbent there, though, had been charged and convicted of extorting money from immigrants. And that was
not a great platform to run on.
No, he was still running, and I think he finished 5th or 6th to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you first ran?
Good question. Well, in Mississauga, it seems young. It's not that young by Canadian standards. I think about 29.
Okay.
Mississauga, though, everybody was a grandmother.
Yes.
Or older. So.
So did they treat you like you were their granddaughter, or were they welcoming when? Oh, you mean?
No. Yes, the other counselors.
The other counselors.
The
were
other
all that
colleagues.
Yeah. Did they treat you with respect? Or?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, they're wonderful women.
Yeah.
Wonderful, strong women who had all done well.
Yeah.
Different life experiences, I think, just about to a person. Most of them had first-race families before they went in and had careers of their own. So it was unique, and that I'd given birth on council, so that was a little unique.
Can you tell me about your actual decision to run municipally as well? Because if you are facing a field of, 20 other candidates, a lot of people would say this is an exercise in futility. This is really crazy. Why are you doing this? What was it for you that made you decide to run?
I think when I put my name in, there were already 16 folks. So you're right. Many people said, it's quite the dog's breakfast there.
Yeah.
It was a compelling story for me. The fact that this person was still running.
Yeah.
He would still give interviews saying that he deserves to be back on the job. Even though he'd been extorting money from immigrants, a person wanted to start up a small business. And he said, he would, he was convicted of saying that he would assist in that if they provided him with tens of thousands of dollars. He then had the money in his pocket and even paid his lawyer with those marked bills. So it was a very compelling story. It really struck a nerve with me. It was my parents had faced and shared those types of stories, that type of thing would go on under a regime where there truly isn't correct rule of law. And, to have that happening in a modern Western country, in Canada's 6th largest city, it was very disappointing, to say the least.
Do you find yourself to be someone who seeks out injustices in those types of circumstances and tries to right them?
When it comes to my constituents, I do find that I take on their issues and I want to advocate for them and I want to help them. And I do want to wander through the maze that sometimes seems to be government red tape to say, it's actually quite possible. Let me help you here. Let me speak up for you. Let's get this fixed for you, because you're right. This can be better. This can be easier.
Right.
And too often people do find it overwhelming or too difficult to succeed. And there are these great ideas that fall by the wayside just because they don't know how to sort of navigate through some government red tape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you enjoyed the federal run so far? I mean,
loving it.
Okay, because it's a lot. It's not just a big job to do, but there's a commute involved. You lived and worked in the same place for so many years with a young child, and now you have the commute that's involved. You do still have a young child. He's 7?
Yes, he just turned 7.
Just turned 7. That's young.
Oh, he's amazing.
I bet.
He is truly just the center of my life.
You know what's nice about that, though, is that because he's young, this is normal for him, right?
Always has been.
Yeah.
He's been to town hall meetings since he was first born, like literally in the stroller.
Yeah.
As I'd have an environmental assessment meeting, or I'm town halling on a different issue, or we're about to go out and community build. But he's also been wonderful to have when we've gone municipally to different parks and trying out different play equipment. And that's how I modernized 7 different parks in the municipality.
Really?
Truly.
You brought along your own test subject.
Yes. What did you find interesting? What actually seemed safe? What was a concern? And you chat with other moms and dads there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But also it gives you the motivation to say, when I was a municipal councillor, we really do need to improve our community center. We really do need to build a new library. We need an ambulance center. And this is where it will be. And I would always measure it. By the time my son is 4 years old, it will be built. And so you check in and you'd be memoed back and make sure your projects were on time and under budget. Proud to say every single one of my builds was under budget and on time.
Wow, that's fantastic. And you also, it would be hard to forget the date at which you had promised that something would be done if it's always your son's birthday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really does keep you in check.
Did your family support your decision to run federally?
That one was a difficult one. My mom, it was really tough for my mom. Because she would be further away.
Yeah.
And my brothers, I think, were a little bit more supportive. They're all obviously proud, but we miss each other a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you rely on them to help you with childcare and looking after? It's Jeffrey, right?
Yes, Jeffrey.
Looking after Jeffrey, or do you feel when you leave for Ottawa that there isn't that weight on your chest weighing you down that so many parents feel that, is everything in order? Is everything?
Oh, I've brought him with me.
You bring him with you?
Oh, yes.
So
I put him in school here, yes.
It's interesting. I often have these discussions with members of Parliament, both on the show and outside of the show, who weigh very heavily the decision as to whether they should keep their families in the riding or bring them here to Ottawa. And I think, truthfully, I always feel that if you can bring them to Ottawa, that it makes life a great deal easier for everyone in the family.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, and you've experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, and I was raised here, and we would go to the riding every weekend.
Every weekend. And
yeah.
my son is a great traveler.
That's good.
He's great in the car. He's got a lot of patience, so he will sit. And it's not so bad. I mean, you have to go all the way out west. Mm-hmm. For us, it's about a 4.5, 5-hour drive, so it's not so bad.
And you do the drive instead of a fly?
We do both. So in the winter, perhaps fly or take the train more.
Yeah.
And then in the summer, we'll drive more.
Right.
But no, he's great. He was 6 when I first came here, so in this term of office would be 6 to 10, and that's a huge chunk of his childhood to miss out on, day in, day out. So he goes to school here, and then we go back every Friday. And then
what do you do when you're sitting late?
Tough.
Can you bring him in?
I have, and in fact, there are these sort of wonderful instances where I'm doing a late show, which means sort of the last debate of the night.
Yes.
And I come out, and my son's there, and you don't know that you're going to be called up to do that. So it's difficult to plan to get a sitter last minute.
Sure.
And so, yes, I'll bring him to the lobby, and he has his books there and so on.
And a pillow and a blanket?
Yes, and he's very good. He sits right there, and he'll play, and he'll read, and he'll draw, and I'll pop back out. And so it was one day I came out, and he told me the story about how the Prime Minister had been there. And I thought, well, I think what he meant was that he had seen the Prime Minister on a television screen.
Yes.
And so I thought nothing of it. And so the next day, I think we were in for late votes, and then again I had a late speech, and it was a last-minute thing, as we had. Like, for instance, last night we had last-minute votes called. Yeah. And I wander out, and there's this big crowd, but they've all kept a bit of space around a couch, and there's the Prime Minister chatting with my son.
So that's really fun. And of course, your son, that's totally normal.
Well, no, I think he knew it was a great experience, but he wasn't quite as phased as just about everyone else was. It was very sweet of the Prime Minister.
That's really nice.
But we make it work, right? So I'll usually finish work around 6 or so, go home, make dinner, be with him, read to him, draw with him. In the summer, we'll go out, do t-ball or something. Or last night, we had a play date over, so his friend came over to our home. Yeah. He's in bed by about 8:15, 8:30. Sure. And then I'll keep working until about 11, right? So that's when I do my desk work and return some phone calls and send my emails.
Those are long days, though. But are you used to long days, or do you not mind it?
My parents did it decades ago.
Right.
Right? And they really did. And all sorts of parents are doing that across the country. And in the GTA, most families, it's both parents work in order to pay that mortgage. So that actually is the norm. Yeah. And you make it work, right? And you have these great life experiences. Like, you have a lot of fun. Like, you know, yesterday I was chasing him around with a water gun. Sure. But so, you wouldn't give up. I can't imagine having him back in the riding and only catching up with him on the weekend. Yeah,
absolutely. It'd be terrible. I mean, for a young child, it would just be, for both of you, it would not be any fun at all. No, it would define him. And it would be heart-wrenching for me. Yeah. So this is what works for us. All sorts of families come up with what works for them. Yes. And it's this wonderful honor. At the end of the day, this is an exceptional honor. Yeah. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about, a lot of people feel that there is a lot of partisanship on the Hill, which would be different from, I assume would be different from what you saw as a councillor. Is it easy to navigate on the Hill? Are you able to make friends with people from other parties and to find commonalities with people from different political stripes? Or are they more silos on the Hill?
You are right in that it was easier to cobble together alliances going in for votes municipally, right? Because you would look at things in terms of quality of life for your residents. You could easily sort of present an argument as long as you've done solid homework. People would feel confident in placing their vote with you. Because it would reflect well upon them when they sought re-election, right? And it would be difficult for them to somehow argue that, you know, just on a matter of principle, they needed to oppose you when you were, let's say, building an ambulance station, right? And you'd put together the funding for that, especially when it wasn't property tax-based funding. So there it's much easier to just walk up to the person that you're working with and reason with them and say, this is why it's in your best interest, and most importantly, this is why it's in the best interest of our taxpayers. And that was a pretty easy sell, right? And you could work and you could achieve a lot. Here, I think that you do socialize, and you'll meet with folks across the aisle, and it's more personal. Certainly when they see my child, people are chattier. Some feel guiltier. I know some that have caused those late night votes look and say, yep, no, we're really forcing her through all of this. Yeah. But you know what? This is democracy, and how extraordinary that we have the opportunity to do that.
Does it have a particular resonance to you when you talk about democracy in that regard because of what you not just have heard from your parents, but how hard you've seen them work in order to survive in a country that offered them democracy? That was really the reason for coming, because they had the opportunity to live in a democratic society.
It is.
Does that make,
Absolutely.
does that touch on what you do every day?
Absolutely. That there is the rule of law, that you can count on the fact that there are rules out there, and that if you follow, you can actually succeed, that everything's transparent and there's stability. And that's really, you know, what so many people want. They just want to know, what are the rules governing this? And I'll work awfully hard. I just want to succeed, and I want to be able to rely on the fact that these rules aren't going to haphazardly change just because, you know, it tickles someone's fancy.
Right.
We really underestimate just how important that is. And we talk about negotiating free trade agreements right now, and we're undertaking some of the most ambitious free trade negotiations as a country. But that's part and parcel. I mean, Canadians have got great products, great services that they could go and sell overseas. The challenge, though, is that there might not be the rule of law. They can't count on the fact that if they need to find a legal recourse in order to go and get their accounts receivable paid up, that they can go there as a foreign national and make sure that the courts apply the law to them. And that's what we're doing as a nation when we go out and we negotiate a free trade agreement. We're saying these are going to be the rules that govern you, and if you'd like to go compete, by all means go and create some prosperity for yourself, your family, for our neighbors. And so on a very small scale, that's exactly what my parents were looking to do here. They just want to know what the rules were and work hard and try and deliver a better life for their family. And it's pretty remarkable that, that I'd have the opportunity to work on the other end of that.
Tell me what you do when you do get some time to yourself. Are you able to pursue interests, whether that's reading or movies or sports? Do you have anything that you can do in this life that gives you some balance, or no? No, I'm getting the no vibe.
reading memos and breaking notes, or that count?
It doesn't count.
That doesn't count.
So no, at the moment you have no life outside of really
you know, you have
political and the mom.
The mom thing, right?
Yeah.
Every time I have free time, I do want to be with him, right? So we're heavily involved in T-ball right now.
Sure.
And Pokemon was the big thing, and before that it was Thomas the Train or Star Wars. And so, yeah, I have to immerse myself in all that and make sure that, that when my son wants to chat with me about these things, that I'm the cool mom.
Wow, you are up to date then. You are up to date. Yeah. So quickly, just before we end, best moments in the house, worst moments in the house, have you had those yet?
Best moment of the house has to be coming out and seeing my son just chit-chatting with the Prime Minister.
I bet.
That was a little surreal.
Yeah.
Worst moments in the house? No, you know what? It's all in honor. I remember
26-hour marathon boats?
I was actually on house duty before that, so for me it was 38 or some such. So we stopped counting because it just got a little too
upsetting.
Yes.
Or just exhausting.
Yes.
Wow.
But you know what? And so you had to stand. You couldn't roam around. And I remember the night we finally got home.
Yes.
I remember, wow, I can actually walk 10 feet. I don't have to ask permission. It's very liberating. No, it's all great. I mean, at the end of the day, we're openly voting, freely voting.
Yeah.
And how great is that? I don't think there can be a bad day in the House of Commons.
Eve Adams, thank you very much for taking the time to be here today. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.